Hello everyone, this is Grunch. Got something different for you today. This is a little bit of a brew, but I got a standard deck to share with you all. This is a Primal Surge deck. So if you don't know, Primal Surge is a 10-mana sorcery, green, and 8. Exile the top card of your library. If it's a permanent card, you get to play it for free, and then you get to repeat this process. So if you ever hit a non-permanent, Primal Surge stops. So the way we make this work is we play a couple of tutor effects. In this case, Increasing Ambition, which I like a little bit better than Diabolic Revelation. Revelation costs double black, and you have to get at least 2 spells off it for it to be getting much of anything, which means you're spending at least 7 mana, 2 of it black. It's just a very awkward spell. Increasing Ambition instead, you can use the front half, to get something to do in the meantime, and then later flash it back, and we have a total of 1 Primal Surge and 2 Increasing Ambitions, so a single Increasing Ambition can get all of the non-permanent cards out of the deck. So, at this point, I should probably read the deck list off, since, unless you aren't looking at the screen, you might not know. So it starts with 1 Primal Surge, and then we have 1 Angel of Serenity and 1 Akroma's Memorial. Akroma's Memorial is very important because when you Primal Surge and put your entire library worth of permanents into play, you need to actually kill your opponent that turn. There are a couple of ways to do this. You could, in theory, have a Laboratory Maniac and some draw triggers off of like an Elvish Visionary or something. That's one way. You could have a Craterhoof Behemoth, who is good, but I like Akroma's Memorial better, just because it's a little bit cheaper in the games where you naturally draw it. So then we have 4 Thragtusks. Value, big dude, he's just the best creature in Standard, why would you not have him? 3 copies of Garruk Primal Hunter, who's actually a very important card for the deck. Being a green, splash white, and splash black deck, we don't have access to too many options for card drawing, and Garruk Primal Hunter is our main source of that. We have 4 Restoration Angels, because if you're playing with Thragtusk, you might as well play with Restoration Angel. We have 1 Yeva Nature's Herald, which I'll get to in about a minute or two for why we want that guy. We have 4 copies of Elvish Archdruid, who is the big mana engine in the deck. There aren't quite that many elves in Standard. I wish there was sort of like 1 more Llanowar elf. Maybe if Avacyn's program were elf instead of human, he'd be a little sweeter, but Archdruid gets some work done. We have 4 Elvish Visionary, who helps smooth our draws out a little bit. There's a value guy for Restoration Angel and an elf for Archdruid, so he makes it. We have 3 Scorned Villagers, who I will also explain in just a minute. They're pretty good. 4 Arbor Elf, again, helps ramp our mana up to those bigger 5-drop spells, which is where we really start the action. And it's also an elf for Archdruid. The only thing about Arbor Elf to note is that he forces you to contort your mana base to have enough forests to reliably play him, which is why this is an almost purely green deck with just a tiny little splash off of the 2 currently standard legal forests that had the forest dual lands, so to speak, shock lands, if you will. And then we have 3 Avacyn's Pilgrims. Only 3 of this guy because he doesn't help us get to turn 2 Archdruid unless we cast him off of a green source and then drop another green source. But it's just awkward enough that he doesn't actually get us there that often. He's not an elf, so it doesn't help with that, and it's just not as good here as it would be in a deck that had like Loxodon Smiters or something to drop. So, now moving along to the lands, we have 7 Forest, because you gotta have Arbor Elf going. 1 Swamp, 2 Plains, 2 Cavern of Souls. I initially had more copies of Cavern of Souls, but what I discovered was that it was hurting Arbor Elf, and it wasn't actually helping me, especially post-board. We'll get to that in a second, but you need your white mana sources to be able to cast multiple types of creatures, so that wasn't working very well. So I went down to 2. Still a good land to have. Still keeps people from countering your Thragtusks and such. 4 Temple Garden, 3 Isolated Chapel, 4 Overgrown Tomb, and then 2 Gavany Township. Sometimes I think it should be 3 Gavany Township. Sometimes I think it should be 1. It just kind of depends on what you're playing against. It's pretty good in some matchups in some games, but sometimes it's a little awkward. Alright, so to explain Yeva, we have to explain Scorned Villager first. Scorned Villager, that's a pretty sweet mana source. If you haven't really played with this guy, he doesn't get a lot of press. I think he's kind of underrated. He's one of the more underrated cards in Standard. If you have a flash creature, you can just pass, and then he flips. And then your opponent, on, say, turn 3, either has to use a removal spell on him, or somehow cast 2 spells, which is not super easy that early in the game, except for possibly some mono red decks to do. Of course, they'll just kill him anyway, so that's kind of a moot point. But instead, if you flip him, and then you play something like Yeva or Restoration Angel, you use your mana on their turn, when you come back to your 4th turn, you can have upwards of 6 mana. And even if you miss a land drop, you still have 5. So you can have like a turn 4 Garruk even missing a land drop, or a turn 4 Thragtusk. It's actually a really powerful mana creature. I think it's kind of sad that he's so criminally underplayed. As to Yeva, she's not outstanding here. We're not doing a ton of things with Flash. But she provides a couple of useful effects. First, she's got 4 power for Garruk, and we want to have at least 3 power to -3 Garruk, which means having Yeva's, Restoration Angels, Thragtusk, this is kind of how we get there on that. Second, she's an elf, which helps power up Archdruid. And there's 11, 12, 13, excuse me. There's 13 elves in the main deck. And that's just enough to have Archdruid be good, but not be broken when you untap with him. If we could run, say, 15, 16 elves, he'd be really getting somewhere, but unfortunately, Innistrad block had no elves. What's up with that, Wizards? So, the basic game plan of the deck is to both advance your mana while providing roadblock creatures like Elvish Visionary and Thragtusk and Restoration Angel, along with Garruk and his beasts. Try to buy enough time to build your mana up to cast Primal Surge, at which point your entire library comes into play. Chroma's Memorial gives everybody haste, flying, vigilance, and you just smash your opponent for well more than their life total. In case you're curious, if the Chroma's Memorial is in your hand when you Primal Surge, that's not a problem because you're going to put a bunch of lands into play off the Surge. So, down here on the sideboard, we have one Yeva, Nature's Herald. We want to add her against 2 categories of decks. We want to add her against anyone who's playing counter spells, because we want to do more stuff on our opponent's turn if they're going to try to dissipate us and such. And we also want her against the red aggro decks, because just a 4/4 for 4 that shows up when in the middle of the attack step tends to get a lot of value. So I just realized there's one, I guess, sort of minor point some of you might be realizing right now that I should probably clarify, which is the interaction between Elvish Visionary and Primal Surge. Elvish Visionary is not a May. When it comes into play, you are drawing those cards. Which means that when you go off with Primal Surge, you need to keep track of how many Elvish Visionary triggers you're going to get. And you need to stop Primal Surging with that many cards left in your library. It's not that hard to do, it's not that tricky. But I can just imagine somebody being like, well, Grunch, you're just going to deck yourself. No, you don't. That's not how it works. You may stop whenever you want with Primal Surge. So just, if you're not sure, just stop with 5 cards left in your library, and you're good. Alright, back to the deck list. For the sideboard, the next chunk of it, we have 4 Triumph of Ferocity. So this is for the control decks and the removal-heavy Jund decks. We want to board this in there because if we're just drawing a card every turn, it's very hard for them to keep all these value threats like Thragtusk and Garruk under control. And it also helps us advance our board state in that we continuously make land drops and play mana guys all along getting towards Primal Surge. Next up, we have 3 Rocks Faithmender. This is hands down, bar none, the best anti-red, anti-aggro card in the format. If you haven't played with it, it might be hard to appreciate. It doesn't look like much. It's kind of an unassuming guy. But when you start gaining double life off your Thragtusks, double life off your Centaur healers, that adds up quite a bit. And she tends to buy you enough time that you can then maybe Gavany Township. That's a pretty sweet one. She just buys a lot of time. Gives you a lot of play there. Next, we have 1 copy of Corpse Traders. Some of you probably don't remember what Corpse Traders does if you haven't played a lot of M13 draft. So it's a black hill giant with the ability of black 2 colorless, sacrifice a creature, and you cast Coercion on your opponent. They reveal their hand and discard a card of your choice. So this is, admittedly, this deck is still sort of a brew, and the idea behind Corpse Traders is that when you play a long game against control decks, at some point, you're going to Cavern of Souls and name Human, play an uncounterable Corpse Traders, and then sack off, hopefully, some disposable creature like an Elvish Visionary, and start taking their counter magic out of their hand. And this is so that once you've dragged on well into the game, you can just Corpse Traders through their counter magic to set up the Primal Surge win. Next we have 3 Centaur's Heralds. This is just bread and butter anti-aggro card. That plus Rock's Faithmender plus Yeva is kind of our plan against red decks. Next we have 2 copies of Angel of Serenity. When you fight the other, I don't want to say other mid-range decks, because with Primal Surge we're trying to go over the top of the mid-range decks. That's actually kind of the reason I tried to brew this deck. But again, you aren't going to need Yeva, you won't need all those Thrag Tusks necessarily. You'd much rather have a board-dominating card like Angel of Serenity. So she comes in basically against anybody else playing Thrag Tusk. And then finally we have 1 copy of Acidic Slime. This is just kind of a catch-all utility card. Kind of a workhorse, does a lot of things. You never know when someone's going to try to get goofy on you and, you know, curse a Death's Hold or, you know, just whatever. There's all kinds of horrible things people try to do to you. Sphere of Resistance. Yeah, just cut that. Alright, so that's the deck list. Kind of the explanation behind all the behind all the cards. This is a pretty sweet one. Kind of a brew. Wasn't the most stable deck, but it was pretty fun. Gatecrash is coming out soon, and at some point I will revisit this deck after some Gatecrash draft videos and some other brews I have in mind for Gatecrash constructed. Next video I post, I'm going to go play this in a daily event, and hopefully, if we're very lucky, you might get to see me flip my whole library into play against some unfortunate opponents. So there you have it. Thanks for watching.